They said it in 2 words, tragic news, and in that instant the illusion shattered. Just after the palace clock marked the hour, a statement slipped out from behind those iron gates and manicured hedges, and the air across the country turned cold. Not dramatic, not poetic, cold, because the monarchy does not use those words unless something has already gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. And this time, the name attached to the shockwave was Prince Louis. For years, the public saw the cheeky smiles, the playful waves on balconies, the mischievous glances that turned him into the royal wildcard everyone adored. But 7 minutes before that statement hit the wires, something else had already happened. Something that forced the palace's hand. Something that no choreography, no media strategy, no royal composure could soften. The official communication startled the country just after the hour had passed on the palace clock. What had once been whispered behind royal doors burst into public tragedy in 7 terrifying minutes. And when the words Prince Louis were spoken in that context, hearts didn't just sink, they plummeted. There was no ceremony to it, no grand framing, no reassuring phrases wrapped in velvet. This was clipped, restrained, careful to the point of being suspicious. It was the kind of palace proclamation that warns without explaining, the kind that tells you enough to panic but not enough to understand. Inside the royal machine, everything moved with mechanical precision. Composure was the priority. Condense the message, protect the crown. But outside those gates, the public was already spiraling, because tragic news is not routine language. It is reserved for moments when the truth can no longer be contained, when silence becomes more dangerous than exposure. Within minutes, major newsrooms flipped into emergency mode. Producers called contacts they hadn't spoken to in years. Royal correspondents began pacing instead of standing still. The question was no longer if something had happened. It was, how bad is it? And perhaps even more unsettling, how long have they known? Because this announcement didn't exist in a vacuum. It collided with something many had quietly noticed earlier that day. Catherine had been seen leaving Kensington, but not as the world knows her, not the polished, camera-ready future queen. Something was off. Her stride wasn't composed, it was hurried. Her eyes weren't simply tired, they looked wounded. Staff weren't arranged in their usual serene formation around her. The choreography was gone. The perfection had cracked. For a woman trained to withstand global scrutiny with a smile that never falters, that crack was deafening. Then the whispering began. Some said it was a medical crisis, sudden, unavoidable, the kind that forces doctors to act immediately. Others murmured about an accident. No warning, no time to prepare, no opportunity to manage the narrative. But the darkest theory? That this wasn't new at all, that the palace had been fighting to keep something under control for months, maybe years, until it finally slipped through their carefully manicured fingers. Because unless it has absolutely no other option, the monarchy does not confirm tragic news. They have weathered scandals, betrayals, public outrage, even humiliations. Silence has always been their shield. So when they choose to speak in language this heavy, it means the truth is already leaking through staff, through insiders, through that unmistakable tension that no press release can conceal. On social media, it exploded. Pray for Louis surged faster than anyone anticipated. But this wasn't casual sympathy. It was fear, real fear. Parents replayed every clip of him with new eyes. Was he quieter there? Was that stumble more than playful clumsiness? Was that smile strained? Suddenly, everyone was a detective. And at the center of it all was Catherine. Not the poised royal figure, not the polished public icon. A mother. A mother facing something no title can shield her from. If this tragic news is truly what it appears to be, those tears were not for the cameras. They were for her child. Beneath the carefully worded announcement lay a labyrinth of secrets, and insiders began pointing to a quieter chapter of Louis's life, one the palace had worked tirelessly to keep out of sight. For years, Catherine's smile has been armor, but behind it, whispers of hospital visits circulated quietly, silent stays, consultations conducted under layers of discretion. There were hints, they say, from Louis's earliest milestones, slight speech delays, subtle irregularities in coordination, nothing glaring, nothing that would make headlines, but enough for a mother's intuition to spark. Specialists were consulted, quiet trips arranged, experts flown in discreetly, neurological assessments conducted under the strictest confidentiality. It wasn't just precaution, it was desperation disguised as control. Catherine reportedly insisted on overseeing every detail herself. Tradition demanded royal aides manage personal and medical matters, but this time, she wouldn't relinquish control. Not when it came to her youngest. Every appointment, every test, every whispered discussion with doctors, she was there. Her schedule shifted, engagements quietly canceled, yet her public smile remained flawless. Those closest to the inner circle understood this was not routine. The conversations weren't about simple recovery. They were about management, preparation, coping, acceptance. acceptance. It was discreetly communicated to Queen Elizabeth in her final months. A single phrase reportedly spoken with chilling gravity: protect the crown and protect the child. That wasn't advice, it was an order. And suddenly, the burden fell on King Charles. Transparency or tradition? Compassion or continuity? Behind Kensington's walls, tension reportedly thickened. William, ever aware of legacy, urged caution. Catherine, guided by instinct, wanted honesty, even if it meant scrutiny. Arguments, sharp exchanges, accusations whispered behind closed doors. She feared secrecy would suffocate their son. He feared exposure would weaken the monarchy. And Louis? He remained blissfully unaware, laughing, drawing, living his childhood while a storm swirled quietly around him. The decision was made. Keep it private. Preserve his normalcy. No headlines, no labels, just Louis being Louis. But no secret survives forever. The royal family had retreated to a rural estate seeking peace. Minimal staff, no public engagements. It was supposed to be serene, controlled, safe. Then it happened. Louis froze, staggered, collapsed. Catherine reached him first. Her scream reportedly echoed across the fields. Within seconds, emergency protocols activated. A medical helicopter was called. Royal protection officers stood helpless, trained for political threats. Not this. William carried his son to waiting paramedics, visibly shaken. The silence during liftoff said more than any siren could. George and Charlotte were quietly removed from the estate, pale, confused, given practiced reassurances that fooled no one. And as that helicopter lifted into the sky, so did the illusion of total control. 7 minutes later, the palace confirmed tragic news, and the world finally realized something the insiders had known all along. The storm wasn't new. It had simply reached the point where silence was no longer possible. The helicopter disappeared into the sky, but the silence it left behind was louder than anything the palace had ever tried to suppress. Inside those spinning blades was not just a child in medical distress, it was the unraveling of a carefully constructed royal narrative. And somewhere between the estate and the hospital, the truth that had been guarded for years began slipping through fingers that had once believed they could hold it forever. By the time Prince Louis was rushed through private hospital doors, secure corridors had already been cleared. Specialists were waiting, consultants who had been briefed long ago on contingencies. Because this collapse, as shocking as it appeared to the public, was not entirely unimaginable to those in the innermost circle. The warning signs had been there, subtle, controlled, managed, until they weren't. Catherine reportedly refused to leave his side, not when the monitors were connected, not when the first hushed exchanges between doctors began, not when the words she had feared hearing were finally spoken aloud without disguise. For years, she had carried the burden quietly, convincing herself that privacy equaled protection, that if the world didn't know, the weight would somehow be lighter for her son. But hospital walls don't respect titles. Sources whisper that the diagnosis discussed behind those closed doors wasn't new, only the severity was. What had once been described as manageable, monitored, stable, now had escalated into something the palace could no longer categorize as precautionary. The event at the estate was not random. It was progression, and that is when the true panic began. Back at Kensington Palace, communications teams scrambled. Every word of the statement dissected. How much to reveal? How much to withhold? There was no playbook for this. A future king's younger son facing a condition that, if mishandled publicly, could ignite global speculation. Yet, if concealed further, the backlash could be catastrophic. King Charles was reportedly briefed immediately. The weight of monarchy collided with the weight of grandfatherhood. The same institution that had survived abdications, scandals, and seismic public criticism now found itself facing something far more delicate: a vulnerable child and a modern audience that demands transparency. William's internal conflict deepened. For years, he had guarded the family's privacy with near obsession. He understood how narratives spiral, how sympathy can morph into scrutiny, how compassion can become commentary. But seeing his son in a hospital bed stripped that calculation of its logic. Legacy suddenly felt abstract. Fatherhood did not. Meanwhile, outside those hospital gates, speculation reached fever pitch. Paparazzi gathered in swelling numbers. International networks ran countdown banners. Social media dissected archived footage frame by frame. Clips of Louis covering his ears at public events resurfaced. Moments once labeled cheeky behavior were now examined like evidence in a trial of truth. Was that fatigue? Was that overstimulation? Was that an early sign no one recognized? The palace statement, minimal and restrained, only intensified the frenzy. It confirmed tragic news but avoided specifics. And in that vacuum, imagination roared. Then came the second wave. Insiders hinting that the condition may involve neurological complications. Words like episodes, developmental concerns, emergency intervention, none officially confirmed, all devastating enough to stick. Catherine, once the embodiment of composure, was seen entering and exiting the hospital through side entrances. No makeup shield, no perfected wave, but her face told a story the palace refused refused to narrate. This was not a staged appearance to calm a nation. This was a mother existing minute by minute. Reports suggest that at one point, she broke down privately in a consultation room, not out of weakness, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from fighting something invisible for years while pretending everything is luminous and flawless. Because here is the truth the palace cannot spin away. This wasn't just tragic news about Prince Louis. It was a moment that forced the monarchy to confront its own philosophy. Control versus compassion. Silence versus strength. Image versus authenticity. 7 minutes shattered the illusion. And though the immediate crisis has stabilized, the deeper transformation has only begun. The crown may endure, as it always has, but the way it protects its own, especially the smallest among them, will never be viewed the same again. The world now watches not for spectacle, but for sincerity. And somewhere inside those guarded walls, a mother sits beside her son, no longer shielding a secret, but fighting for his future in the open light. The palace confirmed tragic news. But what unfolds next may redefine far more than one royal childhood.